I'm Chris Roebuck. I'm based in London, but spend a lot of time in different parts of the world. I advise organisations on how to be more successful, effectively through inspiring their people, getting them to give their best, and then focusing that on to what delivers success. Where do I come from? I have a sort of slightly strange career path in that I started off in the financial world in terms of becoming an economist, training to be an accountant. But then I had a sort of a moment of madness and then joined the army, spent time in the army, moved into the commercial world after that, working with SMEs, worked with London Underground, so unionised, safety critical heavy industry, into KPMG, so professional services, setting up a business with them, HSBC's investment bank, hard end financial services, UBS, came out of UBS as global head of leadership, where what we did at UBS over that period is now a Harvard case study on how to get an organisation to really align as a group of people. Into the National Health Service, again trying to help the National Health Service really get a grip of leadership. Wrote a report for the King's Fund that was submitted to the government on how to develop leadership in the NHS. And also some stuff in local authorities. So the reason I include those different elements is that that journey has taught me a very, very simple lesson, that our assumptions about the differences between organisations and how they are successful, the differences between people and how we get the best from them, are much, much less than everyone assumes. And if you put it in percentages, it doesn't matter whether it's the Chinese space program, investment banks in New York, the Red Cross in Myanmar, or a local authority. The fundamental way an organisation is effective is consistent, and the fundamental way you get the best out of people is consistent. So probably I would say 90% consistency and only 10% difference, whereas a lot of people make the assumption it's actually the other way around.
Yeah. I mean, there's so much there when you say that. My brain is just working overtime just to think, okay, well, where do I actually start based on what you just said? I suppose the first question that comes to mind is, tell me what it is that you're passionate about.
I suppose at its most basic, you know, we all have a limited time on that planet, on this planet, and if during that limited time we can add value to other people and say to ourselves, actually we've done something that has made a difference, then that's what we should be doing. However we define that, it might be me working around leadership in organisations and other things, it might be people doing voluntary work, but it all goes to the fundamental principle of we as individuals making a contribution to the common good, because that's the way humanity moves forward.
Yeah. So you when you said about aligning organisations, I noticed that you gave real emphasis to that word alignment. Like that is something that is really important to you, getting people to work together. Is that really possible? Because one of the things I've observed in organisations is this just massive them and us type thing. And in the writing of this book and speaking to leaders, we're speaking to inspiring leaders who want that. They want alignment. Is it possible to have that in organisations?
Yeah, absolutely. It's how you present it. You see, the problem with leadership is that people talk about leadership and their mind naturally moves over to the world of commercial leadership, the Richard Bransons of this world and all of that. The problem is that is not the totality of the world of leadership. There are all sorts of other leaders out there that are not leading in the commercial world. You know, if you think about the public sector, people in the National Health Service, you think about people in the military, you think about people in the church, and as we've discussed, I, in the past, interviewed Justin Welby, the Archbishop of Canterbury. So, you know, leadership is not about the sector you're in or the business you do. Leadership is about what you do as a person to bring together other people in common purpose to achieve something. Now, that can be done in any environment. if you take the commercial sector, the reason the commercial sector is doing it is because they have to deliver return on investment for their investors.
Yeah.
And they have to serve customers. But other people do leadership for other reasons. Now, the challenge with the commercial world is that they have to think about how can we contribute to the greater good as well as delivering what we have to deliver for our investors. And that is something that the commercial world is coming to recognize more and more under pressure through social media, through to some degree investor groups. For example, the chief executive of BlackRock earlier this year, sent a letter to all the organizations BlackRock invest in, stating quite clearly that in future we will also be measuring you not on just your financial performance, but on the degree to which you add value to your communities and society in general. Now that's really important because that is the first time that a major player in the field has said, as a leadership group, it isn't just about making money for your investors. So I think when we consider the totality of leadership, what we have to think about is the way in which people are leading in different situations and why they are leading. But fundamentally, if you look across all of that spectrum, I think it's fair to say that the ones that are most successful are the ones that are able to get alignment on the end purpose by creating a common desire to achieve that purpose.
Yes. And that can be done, right? I mean, it's
it's about answering the fundamental question in everybody's heads. So if you take any organization, no matter what it does, every employee is asking the question, at its most basic, I'm in this job, I have to do stuff, whatever. One, has this organisation given me the capability to do what they're asking me to do? Two, do I believe in actually what I am being asked to do? You know, does it A, make rational sense? Does it make emotional sense? Do I think that's inspiring? Does it answer the what's in it for me question? And the organisations that are successful, the senior leaders look at that fundamental question about how do we get this done, not just through their own eyes, but through the eyes of everybody else in the organisation. To some degree, they're effectively salesmen. They are selling a purpose, they are selling a destination that they are proposing. It's a journey.
But they don't sell it very, I mean, from what I see, most organisations don't sell that very well to people. And the old school has been the kind of them and us. You have a job, you're getting paid. And it seems like more and more people are waking up, even if a business is predominantly about making money, and the realization of, well, that's not the best, that's not the way we're going to get the best out of people. The buzzwords I hear are purpose, authenticity, and mastery. That seems to, if you look at what people want to feel they are a part of something.
Yes.
They want to feel they're getting better at something.
Yes.
And they want to feel, which is a much bigger question, that there's a bigger purpose to this whole thing.
Absolutely.
So from your experience, why do you think it's important for people to feel that they are a part of something and a part of where a company is going?
Well, if you think about it, a lot of this
it's common sense.
is common sense, and it's got nothing to do with business or organisations.
Yeah.
You know, there is that great quote, pleasure in the job puts perfection in the work.
Yes.
Right. And I ask people...
Yeah, well, let's say... Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I ask people to say who said that.
Yeah.
And everybody says Richard Branson and, I don't know, Steve Jobs or whatever, when in fact it was Aristotle 500 BC. So there is this core feeling in any human being that they want to be part of something, that they want to grow and develop over their lives, that they want to be able to give their best. And that is hardwired into our brain. So there's that sort of core neuroscience, psychological element of it, that people want that. What is really interesting, I find, is that because of social norms, because of understanding or lack of understanding about what's going on in our brains over the years, the way that organisations have worked previously has essentially been, okay, you are an employee, we are the organisation, we want you to work in this way to deliver what we want. If you do that, you're going to get paid. But what they haven't done is they haven't thought about how that's perceived from the employee's perspective. Now, over a number of years, maybe starting from the sort of early 50s, moving through the 60s, it's become apparent that actually there's evidence that employees can perform better if they are part of the team.
Yes.
Now that's always been an accepted fact within the military. So if you look historically going back hundreds of years, that was accepted as part of the development of the military colleges, but it only came into the business world with the development of the first business schools and some of the initial thoughts before the Second World War, between First and Second World War, but also the development of business schools after the Second World War. And it's only then that the business world has been thinking about, actually, there are performance issues here where a team performs better than people who are just being told what to do. What then links, interestingly, into that is that even 20 years ago, we were still making the assumption, organisation, employee, you do the work in the way we tell you to do it because we know what the best process is to make it happen. Because we've done all the process analysis. You fit in with our process. What I think is really interesting now is as the understanding of neuroscience is developing, that it's now becoming apparent that the way the brain works is not totally flexible, and that asking people to work in a way that does not conform to the way the brain likes to work is not a conscious decision. So organisations cannot say to people, we want you to work in that way, if the brain will not work in that way, because people cannot rewire their brains. Therefore, organisations now, because we understand how the brain works, have a fundamental decision to make. It's either we will force people to use their brains in a way that the brain is not designed for to fit our process, or because we now understand how best the brain works, we will alter our process so it optimizes the performance of the brain. Now, the smart organizations are getting that. But that goes back to your point about common sense. Because each of us as individuals knows what we like, knows what we don't like, knows what other people like, and we know there's a commonality that essentially if you try and force people to do stuff, they might just do it grudgingly. If you're proactively good to people, they tend to be good back to you. So we've always known that in terms of common sense. It's just that now organisations are getting the evidence from neuroscience that is saying actually common sense is real. It's actually critical to business.
So when you're saying this, the thing that came up for me was just this whole thing of fear, how many organisations have led with an iron fist, it's fear-based, and you can get stuff out of people, but there's a waking up to the fact if we really want to get the best out of people, there has to be a fundamental change. So from what I see, a lot of people are threatened by that change, and it's often the people at the top who are most threatened by it because they're looking for some form of process in order to put within an organisation. Now, I've heard you say this, that when initiatives come into organisations, how likely is that to be successful from your research?
Well, if you look, one of the questions I repeatedly ask groups of leaders around the world is, if you look over your entire career, what percentage of initiatives you've seen launched got anywhere close to full and successful implementation? And that's been for a number of years. What is really interesting is I get a consistent answer back. The consistent answer is, from most audiences, if not all audiences, that only somewhere between 20 and 30% of initiatives they have ever seen launched ever got anywhere near full and successful completion. Interestingly, there are also studies that confirm this 30% figure. So what organisations are not addressing is the simple fact that of all the initiatives they launch, probably 70% don't work properly.
So you can imagine how so many the people who work in companies, whenever they're being faced with something, so what's the point?
So that's it. That's the initial. That's the response to a new initiative.
So let's look at some of the stuff that you found from speaking to leaders all over the world.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that. About just some of the common things from the Chinese space
people. Well, yeah, it's okay. So what are the common things? The common things are one, doesn't matter what the culture is. Doesn't matter what the organisation does, we are all human beings and we respond in a predictable way to somebody that is being positive with us. What is also interesting is that there are, if you ask, which I do, people to think about what the best boss is they've ever had in their career and what did that best boss do that made you give your best to them. What were those simple day-to-day things that they did? What is amazing is that actually that list is completely consistent, irrespective of culture, irrespective of location, irrespective of sector, irrespective of where people are in the organisation. And it's simple things like they let me get on with it. They showed they cared, they developed me, they asked me for my ideas, they backed me up, they understood I made genuine mistakes, they praised and gave me recognition when it was due. They treated me with respect. They acted with integrity. They led by example. They had a sense of humour. So that list is really interesting because if you take that list, as I say, independently over a period of 8 years now, maybe, every single group of leaders I've asked the question, what did your best boss do, has come back with that list from all over the world. So what that says to me is that isn't cultural. That's about what's going on in our heads. That's what we as a human being want from our boss at work. In terms of cultural variation, yeah, there is cultural variation, not of what's on the list, but of how it's delivered. Yeah. So if we take a simple example that I use, if you're in an American organisation and you're an American, and you want to receive praise and recognition. If you've done well, perhaps on a Friday afternoon, the team leader will call the entire team together, will assemble round your desk. The team leader will say, Chris has done an absolutely brilliant job this week, and let's give Chris a round of applause, blah, blah, blah. That's what happens. That's praise and recognition. If we take exactly the same scenario, and so the employee would be happy. If we take the same scenario and we apply that to a British organisation in London, if a British employee has done well, and at the end of the working week, in most cases, if the person's boss then assembles the entire team around that person's desk and says publicly, Chris has done an amazing job and is an example to you all, and you should give Chris a round of applause, what will happen will be that Chris will hate that boss with a vengeance for the rest of his career. Because from a British perspective, there is nothing more embarrassing than being publicly praised in front of your colleagues by a boss, because that's, in many cases, culturally counteractive to the British perspective of understatement and we don't want to be too obvious. And so for that individual, the optimal praise and recognition within that culture would be a quiet, thank you very much, would you like to come and have a drink at the pub on the way out? Not the more formalised. So both of those are praise and recognition, which is what everyone wants, but the application of praise and recognition is culturally sensitive.
So the praise that everyone wants, that's just people wanting to feel they're a part of
Precisely.
something, part of a group. I mean, that's how human beings survive.
If you look at how you do leadership, as I said, what people want from their boss is the same across all cultures. But there is cultural variation in terms of how that is done. So, for example, and the balancing of that. So, for example, within Anglo-Saxon cultures, there is a tendency to focus on the individual more than, to some degree, the team. So within the context of all of those things that you want from your boss, you, within an Anglo-Saxon environment, would say, yeah, that's what I want, and that has to be most important. Within an Asian environment, or within a much more team-based culture, then you would say, I want those things, but I am prepared to mitigate some of those things if it benefits the team. So there is that, you still want those things, but you are prepared to have less of them if you are in a more team-based culture.
So how does a leader learn all these things? Because it sounds like, really effective leadership is really. Well, how would you describe that? How would you describe?
It's being flexible, and to be flexible, either you need to have the information beforehand.
Yes.
So you have to have a coach or a mentor, or you have to read one of the texts on, i.e., if you're managing a team in China of Chinese people, what are the things that are important to them, whatever. If you can't do that, which you should be able to do, to be blunt,
yes.
with internet resources, but then it's also a combination of A, self-awareness, and B, awareness of other people.
Yeah.
And it's the ability to read what other people are doing. Now, actually, most people can read what other people are doing, but only if they're looking for what other people are doing.
Yeah.
In the sense that, you see, if you're coming at this from a task-focused perspective, you're not going to be looking for what the responses of the people are, because you're just interested in the task. So then, because you're not looking for the responses that the people have, you're not seeing the responses. Because you're not seeing the responses, you're not aware of what they are, and therefore you cannot respond to them.
Yeah.
So therefore, because you are so task-focused, you are not responding to the people, who then come to the conclusion that you only care about the task and not them. And then from that point onwards, it's downhill anyway.
Yeah. So you said about leaders having coaches and mentors.
Yeah.
Why do you feel that's important? So I've heard that saying, leadership is a lonely place. Why does a leader need to have someone they can confide in and learn from? And
it's primarily because, as human beings, we often look at things from our own perspective that is a structure that we create in our minds that is based upon previous experience. Now, therefore, we make the assumption that everybody else's framework is the same, but it's not. So if somebody has been through a different set of experiences, their perception of a problem or what might be beneficial to do could be very, very different. So therefore, for a senior executive, particularly one who is doing some form of major transformation, having problems or whatever, the issue is very much about how can I make sure this is going the best way possible. Now, once those senior executives accept, right, okay, I have a framework of experience that allows me to interpret where I am now and where I want to get to. But actually other people might have a different perspective framework that means that they might take a different route. Am I making the assumption that my route, my analysis is always the best one? If I do, I'm arrogant and potentially stupid.
yeah.
So, therefore,
I need someone.
Therefore, it's worth having a discussion with somebody else about what their perspective is. Now, in a good organisation, even for a chief executive, that could be their team. So if that chief executive is self-aware, is talking to their team, they will discuss the direction they want to go with the team in a way that the team has confidence that they can be honest and open.
Yeah.
So they are getting a different perspective. However, in some environments or with some decisions, they need an external person to talk to. And in my career, and one of the things I do is I put mentoring programs into organisations. So the organisation will say, we need a mentoring program, or how can we best develop understanding, how can we best develop performance. And actually a mentoring program is a really, really slick and quick way to develop networks, to develop performance, to develop understanding. The whole purpose of the mentoring program is also to get people to swap perspective frameworks as well. So that can happen internally, but it can also happen externally as well. Yes. So it's just, I think, again, going back to common sense, making the assumption that I am not always right.
Yeah. And it's also crazy, I suppose, to think that if you're leading loads of people, that you can do it on your own and you have to try and make sense of all of it.
Well, you can't. It's not possible. It's not possible now. Okay, if we were talking about the Middle Ages and the most complex things that were going on then, as economic specialization has increased, diversification of tasks has increased, then for somebody who is leading an organization or even now leading a team, they could well be in a position that they do not have the technical knowledge or understanding that their team members have, because nobody can be that expert in all of those things. It's just not possible. So the modern organizational world means that people who are leaders have to accept that there are other people who work for them who have greater understanding of part of what needs to be done than they do. Therefore, in the modern world, the art of leadership is about leveraging the understanding that everybody has to ensure that the outcome is optimized. And it's not about assuming that I, as the leader, know everything and I can tell people what to do. Because to be perfectly blunt, that is not viable, full stop.
Yeah, so when you talk about outcome and you talk about vision that a business has, and I've heard you speak about this before, where you say about people just being aware of their little piece of what they have to do, their little piece in the puzzle. They don't see the whole big picture of where an organization goes. Why is it important for organizations to have a vision as opposed to just a mission statement, a collection of words? Why is that important, and how do we get everyone to buy into a vision of a business?
Well, I think you can say that to some degree the strategy and the sort of objectives and the mission are, certainly the strategy and the objectives are a rational statement. The vision is much more of an emotional thing. And as we know, if you take some of the figures, an employee's decision to give high performance is 60% rational, 40% emotional. And therefore, that not only applies to day-to-day discussions, it also applies to the key messages that the organisation is trying to give. And therefore, the organisation has to give a key message or set of messages that matches that split. There has to be look, we're asking you to do this for a perfectly sensible, reasonable, rational reason, and the reason is this. And everyone will say, yeah, that makes perfect rational sense. Yeah. Then it's about, well, what's this emotional element? How's it going to benefit me? How do I feel about doing this? Do I believe in doing this? Well, that's not in the strategy. Yeah. That has to come from somewhere else. And that has to come from a leader, in terms of a team, inspiring the people to say, look, if we do this, it's going to benefit us by. If you do this, it's going to help your career by. And that's where leaders need to understand people. But also the organisation needs to have an overarching emotional concept of where we're going as a group that people can sign up to.
Yeah, because the statistics around how few people are really genuinely engaged. Can you give me?
Yeah, okay. If you take ballpark figures, because I was on the sort of one of the expert panels on the Engage for Success report that David McLeod and Nita Clark put together for BIS. And it's not just UK, it's pretty consistent across the world. You can probably say that in most organisations, maximum 25 to 30% of people are engaged. And let's be clear about what engagement means. Okay. There's something called discretionary effort. What discretionary effort is, it's effort that an employee can give if they want to. Now, in most situations, an employee can, within a normal performance management system, come up as performing satisfactorily, but still yet be withholding up to 30% effort. So, i.e., they're doing the job, but they're not giving their best. But because they're doing the job and satisfactory, the organisation cannot tell that they're not giving that 30% extra effort. And if you think about it, 30% is a massive improvement in performance. So the engagement thing focuses on what percentage do we think are actually giving that extra 30%.
Yeah.
That's why the power of leadership is so great, because if leaders can get people to give their best, we're talking about an increase in 60% of people by up to 30% effort.
And you've seen that yourself personally?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
you've seen it from the other studies that have been done?
Yeah.
And how much of that do you think is down to people at the top of organisations genuinely engaging with people and finding out what makes them tick and taking an interest in them?
Totally. It's totally that. And from personal experience, it happens. If you look at all the data, you know, to anyone watching this, there is no dispute now about the facts. If you engage people, you will get better performance, significantly better performance. And if you are a commercial organisation, you will make more money. Fact. An ex-finance director of a major telecoms company that I work with, when we'd worked through all this, effectively said, the comment was, look, this is a license to make money. We should have been doing this for years. If we look at it from the purely financial perspective, and I speak to many investment analysts in the city and finance directors, the bottom line on this is, if leaders do simple things day to day that inspire people to give their best, which we know cost no money, showing you care, asking for ideas, showing people the big picture, blah, 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 it can put up to 10%, if not more, on bottom line. So there is no argument about whether this works or not. It does work. It is a fact. What is amazing is that organisations are not signing up to this in droves, because, to be perfectly blunt, what's going to happen is, and talking to the Chartered Securities Institute in the city, what's going to happen is investors are going to get wind of this, and they're going to say, okay, so how many of our people are engaged? And when they see the figures, and when they fully understand what's going on, they're going to be saying, well, why is it this low? Because we know that if you can increase the number of people who are engaged, it will add money to the bottom line. And as we are investors, we expect you to be optimizing the bottom line.
So do you think that the biggest challenge in all of that is just organisations actually giving it a go? Because it isn't so much about an initiative, it's more about a drive to culturally bring about a fundamental way in the way people engage with each other.
Absolutely. But what is weird is, you see, it's a catch-22. It's a vicious circle. Organisations are so distracted by what they're currently doing, they cannot break the vicious circle they're in. And breaking the vicious circle is to say, hang on, wait a minute. Only 30% of initiatives ever work properly. We only have 25% of people who are engaged. And in that situation, going back to what I've said about what underpins this is some basic skills amongst leaders around time management, prioritization, delegation, feedback, and communication. Because if leaders in organizations cannot manage a simple task effectively, they are going to be firefighting and focusing purely on the task. If they focus purely on the task, people are going to get the feeling that they don't care about them, and they're not going to have time to ask people for ideas. They're not going to have time to explain how them, because they're going to be firefighting. So the criticality of this is not that it's culturally sensitive, not that it's complex, not that it's difficult. It's just that organisations are trapped in their own vicious circle. But what has to happen is, to break that vicious circle, somebody has to say, actually, you don't need to think of leadership in a complicated way. You don't need to do complicated stuff because you don't have time. You just have to do simple, practical stuff on a day-to-day basis that you are already doing most of anyway. You do more of it and you do it better, and that will pull you out of the vicious circle.
Fantastic. So, lastly, we can't be here together on the day after England beat Colombia on penalties. Indeed. And there's an amazing picture of Bobby Robson behind you. What do you put that down to? That what Gareth Southgate has done, that it looks like no other English leader, English manager has been able to do in the last 40 years?
I think there's two key things. One, and this is like anybody in any job, it's about those two things, capability and belief. And I believe what he's managed to do is he's managed to focus on the capability, and in particular, if we look at what happened with Colombia, lots and lots of practice of taking penalties. And it's also on creating a belief in a reasonably young team that they can do it.
Yeah.
And if you put those two together, then you have a powerful combination. But that's also a lesson for any leader in any organisation, or be it a first line manager or a chief executive. Amongst your people, you have to A, give them the skills to do the job to the ultimate ability, and B, you have to give them the belief in what they're doing. And when you put those two together, then you have an unbeatable combination. Yeah. And it was pretty close to the edge, but that's what we've done.
From the outside, watching it and having obviously worked in the sport world for so many years, I have a love now for him. That's a strange word, I know. A love for him, a love for the team. I identify with them. I feel that I'm a part of it. And there's two things I want to finish on, which is one thing I heard someone say recently about leadership, saying, what's the most valuable commodity in the world? In a group he was asking, and people said, gold, diamonds. He went, no. Leadership is the most valuable commodity in the world, because the world needs good leaders more than ever, that people will follow someone who wants to do what. I mean, how do you answer that? I mean, I don't know what I'm asking you to say, but do you agree with that about how important leadership actually really is?
If you think about what leadership is at its heart, the verb to lead means to move from one place to another. And therefore, you make the assumption that most people would want to move to a better place than they are currently in, rather than a worse place. So that's what we're doing in all aspects of our lives as human beings. Going back to the neuroscience, it's we want to grow and develop. We want to move from here to a better place. To get from here to a better place, we have to have people who will help us get there. Those are leaders, whether they're business leaders, political leaders, social leaders, scientific leaders, whatever. Somebody has to help us go on that direction, on that journey. And it is a journey. It's a journey of learning, a journey of understanding, a journey of those three things. Do we have the firm foundation of capability? Do we get the best from people? Do we focus it onto what delivers success? And that is fundamentally what a leader is. A leader takes you from one place to a better place. That's why it's so important. But I think the bigger question is, what enables a leader to do that? And it goes back to those two fundamental questions. One, do I trust this leader? Two, do they have the capability to do the job? And we completely underestimate the criticality of trust. Because trust means that we will do what we have to do to support that leader. But the danger is that trust is not rational. Trust is emotional.
Yeah.
Trust is not conscious. Trust is subconscious. So therefore, when you know when trust is there and you know when trust is not there. But there is no rational way of understanding how.
Yeah. So lastly, let's look at love. Mm-hmm. So I've heard more and more leaders talk about their secret weapon is love. Loving what they do, loving people. Not love in the term of the way you would love a child, or do love this kind of positivity resonance that it's called. How important do you think it is for people to love what they do and to love the people who work with them?
If you just go back to the basic practicalities of it, you will perform at your best when you are doing something A, you are good at, and B, you like doing.
Yeah.
And that's the simple fact. Okay, there are things we all have to do that we don't particularly like. But it is those things where you are inspired to do them because you enjoy doing them, where also you have the capability and skills to do them. And it's really, but this goes back to, the most basics of, for example, the education system as well. It is that how do we take children and marry their natural talents with a job that would inspire them? And that's, one of the fundamental challenges of the world that we face. The effective education of the next generation in a way that enables them to give their best so that it takes us on another journey.
Well, that institution has to adapt, just like you're talking about with the institutions and organisations that you work with. I really appreciate this. It's been absolutely inspiring, and I'm excited. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Cheers.